Chapter 56. Things continued to go quite smoothly with the boys after that, as their parents weren't mad enough to oppose an invitation into the service of a great house, though you did feel that they had a problem with how eager the boys were to finally get started. You on the other hand really didn't fault your new companions for their lack of control, though you did decide that they weren't ready to meet your father like this for quite some time. Thus, you decided that you would need to allow them a few weeks to adjust a bit to the rock before you would throw your father at them. You loved him from the bottom of your heart, but he truly wasn't made to play around with children that weren't his own, which was now quite annoying since the three of them were far too talented to not catch the attention of your father. But that being said, Antos, Tylon and Malta were young, too young, and while you were certain that they would sooner or later manage to cross paths with your father as was normal, you really didn't want to risk anything seeing as they were more or less normal children unlike you and Marie, meaning any damage to their minds and mental state may be permanent. Concerns like these weren't usually something you wasted your time on, but the same things you told Marie so long ago still applied to the brothers, especially since they didn't have her enhanced charisma that could just sweep away all those problems. But you had now 5 people in your retinue, not just 2, and all of them were commoners, with 4 of them being still children. Yeah, anyone could guess what the majority of your father's vassals would think about that, and how harsh they would treat the boys as a result. But you were sure that your mother would understand your concerns, so you silently left the brothers to their weight training and made your way to the gardens to see if she would have some ideas for how to keep your father away from the boys while they were still mentally vulnerable. It felt weird to put it like that, but it genuinely seemed like your father would be able to intimidate a fully grown lion with his presence alone, so it really wasn't something that you wished didn't exist, it was just hard to contain. It's an awesome ability that you couldn't match to this day. For most of the time when someone stopped you in your last life you were required to show what would happen to your enemies again and again to get the point across. Yes, one could say you were genuinely jealous of your father, which was something you had never felt when you were still free to conquer in your last life. But this only drove you on to improve that aspect of yours, for it was absolutely beyond you why so many people see jealousy as something bad, given that trying to suppress it would just be disingenuous and would lead you nowhere. With those thoughts in mind you wondered if you should integrate the many uses of jealousy into your lessons, but you decided quickly against it. Brilliant or not, they were still brothers and you didn't trust yourself that you could fix the bond between siblings from the outside if it were to break. You weren't perfect, just like the rest of humanity, hence you had a decent number of your shortcomings that could be found in matters concerning emotions, which made it hard to properly evaluate the risks and returns in these situations. It was a weakness to be sure, but you had little interest in fixing it, seeing as it provided you with a good reason to not tempt fate when you found a way to be more efficient. It was a largely harmless flaw that you used to gain greater strength by preserving such a glaring weakness to make sure you would remain properly grounded, and your progress driven by said grounded mind and passive jealousy and desire should be obvious. For while you certainly didn't have the presence of your father, you still had improved massively since the time of the water elemental debacle and the whole matter with the 6 guards that you killed that day for being denser than lead. You supposed that many sheep might be born by embracing negative emotions, but you truly couldn't see anything else that would explain why no one seems to openly use said emotions, and most people didn't even understand what you actually meant by sheep, so that didn't make much sense, did it? Why would people focus on achieving all kinds of positive emotions and then turn around and act all bothered by the use of negative emotions? Isn't the turning of something bad into something good the best thing one can do, similar to how corrupting something pure is seen as the worst thing one can do? You didn't know why you thought of all this madness corrupting the world when you simply wished to speak with your mother about your father, but you guessed that it didn't really matter seeing as it wasn't anything new. So you simply refocused on finding out if you could buy the boys some time to hopefully adjust and impress your father. Sadly, your mother was rather unsatisfied with your limited and sporadic visits, so the price for her help was quite high in terms of how much time you would have to spend with her. She wanted to play with you for a whole month. What madness! You weren't even allowed to bring anyone but your knights along, so you would have to give Marie some work to make sure she wasn't digging her own grave somewhere while you were wasting your time drinking tea. But nothing you tried to shorten the time worked on her, and you finally had to give up when you heard that your pushing got you the position of the stuffed animal for the month she would be staying in your chamber. It was a surprisingly dirty move by her seeing as you could guess your father's reaction to sleeping a month without her, and you were sure that no one would want to work near him in that state of stress. Not even you, for you still had plans with your life. Honestly, your mother could be such a meanie when she wanted to be. It must be the Lannister blood. Chapter 57. You wondered for a bit if you could perhaps still manage to escape your mother, but no new problems came into sight as the month began, and you didn't have it in you to push away your mother without a good reason, which of course meant that your fate was indeed sealed. But while you really didn't enjoy being so restricted in your movements, things could still be worse, for you had your statues all around the rock to distract you, which helped you a lot to keep it together. Thus, you used them like the necklaces you sent to the Vale to continue your work from afar in an effort to keep yourself occupied throughout the nights, seeing as you were once more stuck lying still at night like you were so many years ago. It was naturally straining your mind to lie still for hours again, but you were sure that you could manage it, and though you were annoyed with your mother for being so unreasonable, the days to come promised to be so exceptionally boring that you decided those thoughts wouldn't do your mental state any good. Which combined with it all clearly making her happy, made you determined to endure it till she was satisfied, even though it clearly and frustratingly didn't do your other relationships with your family any good. You did neglect your bond with her after all. But still, your mother was truly far too popular under the Lions of the Rock for you to just keep her to yourself for a month, even if you had nothing to do with it. But just knowing that didn't actually help you, as your siblings continued getting annoyed with you over this whole issue you had pretty much no hand in creating. Well, sometimes there really were no right answers to take, so you took it in stride and simply showed them the cold shoulder. Though while that part was rather annoying, not everything was, for while you often distanced yourself from your mother in the past, partially to keep your brother and sister occupied, you were actually quite fond of her as well. But you never showed it, seeing as it felt far too childish for you to seek cuddles and the like. Well, at least there were some positives to playing the part of the stuffed animal each night, as you didn't need to utter a single word to get cuddled, which was also why you were sure that your mother would be satisfied once the month had passed, just as you had so speedily planned. For if this whole fit of madness was really based on a simple lack of affection from you, then fixing it like this shouldn't be a problem, though you're a bit unsure what you could do to resolve the issue with your agitated siblings. It would be a lot easier if your cubs and statues were able to give you some decent intel on the both of them, but since you increased the amount of your statues quite a bit over the years, it was now impossible to passively gather intel. Though that being said, your little siblings got brighter in exchange for your loss, so it wasn't something that bothered you all that much, given that they could still report what they learned to you. Like how you had just learned a few hours ago that Malta and Cersei liked each other quite a bit as they met near one of the training yards for the archers bordering the tower of your father. Said information isn't directly important, of course, but it would still be useful for the future, seeing as it was confirmed by both the necklace and the cub. There were way too few people with actual talent around her and Jaime, and with your little brothers and sisters confirming the friendship, you realized that you would most likely only have one of the brothers for yourself once their training was finished. For you could already see that your siblings would most likely be in need of a formation leader that could handle the logistics of their own retinues and escorts sooner or later, but it's not all that important for now, though that they have taken a liking to each other was still quite useful for the planning of future projects. No, thinking more coldly about it, this really wouldn't do. You will have to spend years to get the Argan brothers to the standards you envisioned for the troop and formation leaders, and you wouldn't just waste all that time for nothing. You just couldn't. Yeah. You genuinely can't afford to just give up two of them to your siblings one day. The three of them were yours, and while you weren't someone that sought profit for the sake of profit, no one could take the three of them away permanently. Perhaps they could be leased to gather some more experience, but they would simply be wasted commanding only a few hundred soldiers. Perhaps Marie could help you with the issue. The finding of a few good and trustworthy men skilled in logistics for Jaime and Cersei once they were in need of such support shouldn't be too hard a task for her, all things considered. You honestly didn't want to weaken the armies of the Rock by squeezing it for skilled personnel. You continued to think about it all as time slowly tickled by, and once your mother finally woke up again, you asked her to help you with the issue, seeing as you had no idea what she would do. You didn't want to commit to the wrong decision while your mental state was still compromised by all the concentrated boredom filling your mind, so you thought asking for her help would be the right decision. You were wrong. Sadly, your mother was still half asleep and so only listened with the bare minimum of focus that was required. The only thing that stuck from your explanation was that you wanted to keep the boys, which quickly filled her with unrivaled energy that she used to swat your explanations of her misunderstanding out of the air one after another for the rest of the day, and you're pretty sure she still doesn't believe you. Chapter 58. As the days continued to trickle by, nearly all of your concerns were slowly swept away by your family while your mind swiftly recovered from the built-up agitation and boredom, which returned some color to the world. Though while things were fortunately still going smoothly even with your current predicament of being stuck with your mother, more so than should reasonably be possible, no new problems emerged to replace the solved ones which unnerved you to no end, for the world simply doesn't work like that. Perhaps the gods had a hand in it, but things were going so unnaturally smoothly that you couldn't help but worry a bit. For very few issues not directly related to war could be solved in just one push, and even your father should have some trouble playing the king as he apparently did to get what you proposed to him so long ago. Mayhaps the Targaryens are destined to fall, meaning no god is actually backing them up and that's why the king approached your father so openly, or perhaps you simply did more damage to the man's mind than you had anticipated you could from so far away. But then again, your father didn't hesitate to use the situation, so it didn't really matter enough to get obsessed with, you supposed. Whatever issue might come up shouldn't stand a chance against your father and the hosts of the Rock even if they can't be deployed in full strength after all. And while it was quite surprising that the king actually gave some land of House Tyrell to your family to make sure the Westerlands wouldn't come out of all this unharmed, you did deal with the madman. You guessed that enough random-seeming proposals delivered with crafty words by the best spies and sympathizers serving House Lannister in the capital did have a decent chance to sooner or later plant the right thoughts into him over the years. Though despite how much gold your family invested to get it done, it still felt wrong that a king ruling a continent would commit such a blunder. It must be the incest you guessed. Even a crazed mind wouldn't be enough for someone to be this inept. That being said, you did make sure to sell giving more lands to your family as good as you could when the first agents you sent asked you how they were supposed to accomplish their mission. You were sure that the troops would have their work cut out for them with all the pointers you gave indirectly to the crown, yet this also meant that you knew what you had to deal with for the most part. Which, seeing as you never seriously thought this would actually work, wasn't all that much with how most of your ideas that could do some genuine damage never even crossed your lips. You didn't have a reason to make a list of strategies against your own house after all. Hence, a few hundred raided armories and 4,000 or 5,000 deserted troops striking from the few forests in the region should be all that will cause serious attrition in the open lands of the Reach. So a few thousand losses at most was what you were expecting, enough to create the illusion that the king's decision was right and didn't need correcting. It showed that the crown had truly no idea just how much strength your house had actually amassed in the Rock, with how the loyalists supporting the crown still thought that a few thousand losses would suffice to stop your father's ambitions. What a joke. If you disregarded how unnatural it all felt, you would say that everything was going quite well, but with how you were still stuck in the embrace of your mother for a bit, you were sure that you wouldn't be allowed to join the hunt for the enemies of your house. Well, it's not really the end of the world that your father and his men would have all the fun given the situation and his stress, but you won't give up just yet. There was still a chance that if you asked your mother nicely enough that you could send some statues along with your father. Hope is cheap after all, and you didn't want to waste more men or time than was necessary. Especially with how things were working out so nicely with the Ironborn and the Vale, you didn't want to risk that any mistakes, no matter how small, would add up now that the Crown together with the Tyrells and the Starks managed to fully constrain the Ironborn to their own waters once more. For you knew that with the coast secure, everyone could see that the Ironborn effectively lost any and all chances they still had at winning their rebellion, which would mean more houses would begin supporting the crown for a final push, but that was all things considered okay. For in the light of everything that happened, it was clear to you that it took the king far too long to still gain much from his victory. There were of course still enough factions and houses in the realm that welcomed the now guaranteed victory to restore all the lost strength to the crown for the time being. But as long as your house didn't make any major moves for a few years, that support should bleed away once more, given that the king wouldn't trust a lord joining him only now in the slightest. You could imagine what happened to lords the crown didn't trust these days, so yeah, you give the king 3 years at most for the realm to break again once the war is finished, depending on the long-term reaction from House Tyrell. If they see merit in weakening the Westerlands for supporting the Ironborn with ships, there's naturally a good chance that the peace will last a full 3 years, but you seriously doubt that they would have the strength to hold the Reach together that long. But for now you simply decide to focus on convincing your mother to allow you to send some statues as well. She surely wouldn't be against additional protection for Jaime as he joins your father in his journey to the Reach, right? Chapter 59. As it turns out, that assumption of yours was indeed correct, as your parents quickly accepted your proposal of adding half a dozen new statues to the troops guarding your brother. Though while you were pleased with their answer, it still meant that you would now need to create these new statues with limited time, given that the new lands of House Lannister became more and more messy with each passing day. For your house didn't have nearly enough boots on the ground to keep all the new vassals in line, which in turn meant that your father had no intention of actually waiting for your new creations, given that they should be fast enough to catch up to him before he crossed the border. It wasn't normally a problem seeing as you could by now create hundreds of statues in just a few moments, but the standard quality wouldn't do for something as important as the safety of your brother even if said quality meant that they were more or less indestructible once you were done with them. What you needed to focus on was what troubled you before, namely the needed improvement to their perception, for guards no matter how strong simply weren't any good if they couldn't find any threats before it was too late. And while your brothers and sisters were a bit more perceptive than they were before, that was sadly a very limited change to their minds that allowed them to properly evaluate new information, and didn't actually improve the amount of information they could gather. Eyes made from stone could only see so much after all. So the days slowly tickled by as you worked on them, while several dozen smiths freed up by the leaving of your father's host created their blackened armors, leaving just enough space for the gambesine to preempt the clinking of steel on stone. It was as always rather satisfying to see your creations improve as you continued to work on them, but the time pressure made sure that you couldn't indulge yourself in truly perfecting anything, which was quite annoying. But while you didn't have as much fun as you usually did when you created something, you still managed to swiftly find a few ways to improve their ability to gather information so that you could more or less accompany your brother on his little adventure through the Reach. Your father wanted Jaime to grow into his future role by smashing the rebels, bandits and minor lords defying House Lannister, but you were sure that he wouldn't mind if you gave him some advice from time to time, as long as he still learned something. And even if Jaime didn't listen or rather didn't read what you had to say, it couldn't hurt to make the effort for your little brother, and should he do something that will put him in danger you can always just drag him back to camp with your statues. Easy as that, no need to really worry, so why do you still worry? Well, if you're honest with yourself you already know why you continue to worry about your brother. It's because he's too soft and small. Yes, far too small. Why couldn't your father see that? Normally a suit of plate armor can make anyone formidable as long as the wearer isn't completely inept, but on your brother it looked different. Jaime didn't look formidable in the slightest, and neither did he look so much as a year older wearing his armor. It just made him look absolutely adorable with his still oversized shield and those wide green eyes of his. He truly couldn't be compared to what you were currently creating, especially considering the height of your statues and the glowing warhammer with two eyes added to make the collecting of information more effortless. Looking at them, the two statues you and the smiths had already finished equipping both stood 3 meters tall, and were holding their dimly glowing magma warhammer which was greater than a grown man before them in absolute silence. They were simply what you had judged to be necessary to make absolutely sure that your brother would be safe, but looking once more at them with the blackened armor and the deep red gambesine beneath, you had to wonder how to properly judge your brother. Truth be told, you weren't too sure if you could still judge your brother for looking small in comparison to those two. No, you guessed that everyone but your father would look as small as Jaime when compared to them. But then you knew like everyone else that your father wanted Jaime to one day take his place as Lord of the Rock, so if your father would certainly still look formidable when standing between your statues, shouldn't that be the standard that you would have to set for Jaime as well? There was time you supposed, and these things really didn't count as one of your strengths, so it's probably best if you simply asked your parents for which standards they preferred for Jaime. It was a difficult question to even think about considering how massively different your parents were. Though you supposed that your mother would already be happy if he stayed as adorable as he was, so there was a good chance that the both of them had completely different standards to judge Jaime's growth by. Yeah, it might take quite a while before you will get the answer you sought. Perhaps focusing on your own work is the best course of action you had at the moment, seeing as Jaime was still the heir to the rock and the new lands of your house were everything but safe. Which would of course only get worse considering that the king was apparently unaware of the planned presence of your brother, something that wouldn't remain that way for much longer. No one would even so much as dream about going after your father in his own camp, but a little boy of 10 that would be regularly sent out to hunt bandits and rebels with his men would clearly be another matter. Thinking about it, he really made for quite the juicy target, so yeah, you should probably focus on getting your statues done. You couldn't leave his safety in the hands of regular soldiers and knights in such a situation. Chapter 60. With Darlan helping you out, the basic training of Marie and the 3 Argan brothers continued to go smoothly. Thus you decided that you should spend a few more weeks by your mother's side to avoid distractions through potential new projects. Your specially crafted 6 little brothers and sisters could protect Jamie even if you didn't pay attention to them, that much you knew for certain, but knowing something and then actually acting on that knowledge wasn't simple, so you still continued to worry. Though while there were overall few distractions so deep in the rock, you were no longer alone with your mother, as Cersei was apparently quite bored without her cute and awesome brother. It didn't really bother you, but you could feel that she was still displeased with your presence. Not that either of you could do anything about it, so you simply ignored her for now and instead focused on protecting your brother. Your statues had successfully caught up with the host of your father some 2 hours before he marched it over what was once the border between the Reach and the Westerlands, so despite your many worries, you were sure that things would work out. Hence, you decided to use the time you had to explore your father's camp while Jamie was still sleeping from the long days of riding. Everything considered, things were too quiet for your taste, as neither the rebels nor the bandits committed to moving against your father's host of 30,000 men, for rather obvious reasons. But seeing as the full pacification will most likely take years, a few quiet days meant nothing, for you already heard that Jamie and his men would receive their first targets once the scouts returned. And targets in this context meant a chain of time-sensitive objectives that wouldn't allow him to regularly return to Rosehold, as the Lords of the Reach loyalty your father called his encampment. Rosehold, what a silly name, but you guessed that it fit the tastes of such disgustingly soft-looking nobles, and you supposed that your father's camp did have a certain beauty to it with the thousands of red tents spread across 6 great hills as they were. But that the first thing that comes to their minds when they see thousands of red tents is roses was truly laughable. If only they were the ones that opposed your father's new claim, things would be perfect. These little thoughts continued to float around your mind even as your favorite statue continued walking towards your brother's tent as his cub informed you that he was finally awake and armored for the day to begin. Though despite your best efforts, you sadly failed to surprise him, seeing as even a 3-meter-tall knight in blackened armor can't really compare to one of your krakens. It was quite embarrassing seeing as he knew that you saw through its eyes, but the blunder seems to have restored a bit of your lost bond, so you were still satisfied with how the morning was going while you watched him train. Given enough time, or more precisely a few more years to hone his skills with the blade as well as a magic sword, you could see him gain quite the reputation as he sparred with one of his many to you still nameless knights. As you thought about his skills at such an early age, you couldn't help but worry that the strength of your statues might someday destroy his will to train and improve. All of your 6 not-so-little brothers and sisters would be able to smash the best knights of the realm into the ground without facing anything that could be called resistance. You really hoped that it wouldn't discourage him too much, seeing as you didn't really know of anything that he likes as much as training with that sword of his. You felt like your thoughts were more and more occupied with worries which annoyed you to no end, but you couldn't really apply your normal methods of refocusing. Finding something interesting as a distraction would put your brother's life at risk, so you would just have to suck it up for now. Jamie was young, but not weak-minded, so things shouldn't fall apart like that. Yeah, it would be really nice if it was that simple to calm your mind. Your mind finally cleared up a bit a few hours later as you learned what objectives your brother would be expected to clear, and it didn't look too bad. 2 minor holds that didn't send any messages to neither the Rock nor the Rosehold, and 4 more villages that didn't pay their dues to the new lords of the Westerlands and by extension to House Lannister. Again, all in all not too bad. Killing a guest under your own roof was essentially a death sentence for all but the most powerful houses, so both Studley and Santor Castle should be reasonably safe. Or well, at least they won't try anything so damaging and dangerous as poison and daggers. Perhaps they won't open their gates and fight, but that wouldn't be a problem, that would be a boon. And if there was a village that could defeat 200 knights, you had yet to see that magical place, so taking 4 villages along the way shouldn't be a problem either, which did quite a fine job at dispelling those useless worries of yours. With 6 clear and not too dangerous targets to strike at, you found yourself nearly as excited as you could see your brother was. You were relieved that your father didn't send him off to some random forest to hunt down loyalists of the Crown and House Tyrell. For who knows how many rebels could be stationed in a forest with enough preparations. You guessed that you should give your father some more trust when it comes to these things. Mayhaps you should just focus on supporting the Ray and Paltron companies as your brother moves with them through the Reach for now.